Heidi ho, my peeps. It is time for another bath time confessional. I'm deep conditioning my hair right now, so I thought that this would be a good time to come on and talk for a few minutes. This is for Miss Susanie. I promised you that I would do a video about my night in jail. So, I hope you guys enjoy this. All right. You have to picture this. It was the 1970s. 1978, I believe. 1978 or 9. I was 18, so I can't remember which year it was. Anyway, I lived in Southern California, Orange County, as a matter of fact, in a lot of little towns. We'd move around every once in a while. You know, you'd get a 6-month lease at an apartment, or we'd crash somewhere for 3 months, whatever. So I lived in, let's see, Santa Ana was the first place I lived. I lived in Westminster. I lived in Costa Mesa. I lived in Huntington Beach, Garden Grove, and that was the last little town I moved to. And this was in a very short amount of time. This was like in a 2-year period. Anyway, back then, in the late 70s, when you were a rootless teenager, life was pretty free. I mean, you didn't have to have background checks to get an apartment. You didn't have to, nobody checked your credit. Basically, if you wandered in and had plunked down enough money and you didn't look like a serial killer, you could get a place to stay. Getting jobs was really easy. At least it was for me. I could walk in pretty much anywhere and get a job. And I worked primarily selling shoes. I also worked doing telephone answering way back in the days before there was such a thing as, even as pagers weren't even really popular yet. So that was back in the dinosaur days. And when I moved to Southern California as a 17-year-old, I was just barely getting ready to turn 18. I had just gotten out of high school, and I went to a prep school, private Catholic high school. And most of the people that I'd gone to school with were pretty conservative by and large. They all had, not all, I mean many of them had, dads who were either in business, like there were a lot of restaurant owners in my class. There were doctors' kids, lawyers' kids, all different kinds of kids. Everybody wasn't wealthy or anything, but by and large everyone kind of had, all these kids, they were really looking forward to going to college and continuing their social thing. A lot of them were going to, like we had somebody going to Annapolis, blah, 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 a lot of military ROTC kids. So you had those guys, and then you had people like me who were kind of rootless. We didn't know if we wanted to be theater arts majors or, disco dancers for a living. I mean, it was a pretty rootless time. And all I wanted to do was get the hell out of my hometown. That's all I cared about. So while I was working at a camp, which is what I did every summer, I cooked at this camp up in the Sierras. I met a woman. She was considerably older than me. She was, I think, 17 years older than me. Her name was Sally, but we were great friends. And she was going back to her old job after the camp was over as an exotic dancer. That's right. My first roommate, well, actually my second roommate, was a stripper. So I moved to Southern California, and we got a place. Well, first we lived at her parents' house, then we got a place. Shortly thereafter, I met my husband. So it was within 6 months I met him. So anyway, my first husband, not the man I'm not my husband today, but my first husband. And I was still pretty rootless. We were, I don't know how to put this, just kind of dating and screwing around and, you know, drinking too much, and I was drinking too much, and just being generally irresponsible, except for, I remember being really responsible about going to my jobs and bringing my money home and paying my bills. I was responsible about that part. But just my general life, I was just a kind of a typical 18-year-old rootless child. Well, one night, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, because we hadn't married yet, she and I and her friends went out drinking. Now, we went out drinking a lot. My husband was not a drinker. He didn't enjoy alcohol. But I sure did, and so did my friends. So we climbed into the back of my soon-to-be sister-in-law's silver surfer van with like surfer murals on the inside, paneled in walnut with a waterbed and carpet. I mean, that whole deal. And we drive around to parks or to clubs, 18 and over clubs in different places, and, just generally screw around. Well, one night we had gone to this place in Santa Ana called Handlebar Saloon. Handlebar Saloon was an 18 and over club. Of course, they'd stamp your hands and the whole deal, and if they saw you drinking, they'd kick you out, blah, blah. Well, of course, they saw us drinking, and they kicked us out. Well, by that time, I was already 3 sheets to the wind. I was tired. I was buzzed, like way buzzed. I wanted to go home so badly. It was probably around midnight or so. And so I told my compatriots, I said, listen, I'm going to go back to the car and just lock myself in, and you guys, I'm going to go sleep. Okay, fine, whatever. And back then you didn't even lock your car all the time, so I knew the van was open, right? So I started walking towards where I thought the van was parked. It was parked in a little parking lot. So I'm walking along the street. No, wrong way. I turned in the other direction. I'm probably getting further and further away from the place. Well, pretty soon, and there's no one around, incidentally. I mean, there's not like people on the street. This is in kind of a sketchy area. So pretty soon, I'm standing at the corner trying to figure out which way to go, and a cop car rolls up. And the cop gets out and he says, hey, he says, do you know you're being followed? And I said, no, and I look around and there's these guys running in the other direction. Well, cop says, listen, stand on one foot, touch your nose, the whole deal. He says, no, listen. He says, I'm not going to arrest you, but I'm going to take you in so you can, sober up. So, puts me in the back of the cop car, takes me down to the what was it? Not the Santa Ana jail. I don't know which county. Orange County Jail. And I end up sitting around with a bunch of other women for 2 hours before they let me out around 2 o'clock in the morning. So while I was in jail, I learned some really interesting things. I learned how to play poker the real way. I learned that when you have to pee, you will pee in a completely open toilet with a bunch of other people sitting around. You lose all your inhibition. I learned that if you pass bad checks, you will end up in jail. I learned that if you're a prostitute, you will end up in jail. I learned that if you're a stupid kid wandering around the streets at midnight, you will end up in jail. It was just real interesting. So I'm chatting with the women, and we're just chatting and waiting, and every once in a while somebody would leave or somebody new would come in. Well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it was a man, I don't even think it was a woman who came to the door. Yeah, okay, you're out of here. So they gave me my stuff back, my shoes or whatever it was they took from me, and all right, see you later. Well, let's see now. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I have nobody to call. I'm 10 miles away from home. Interestingly enough, the jail was situated on the same main street that ran right next to my house. So it was a 10-mile walk, straight shot down the street to get home. I have no money to call a cab. And my boyfriend at the time was working because he worked a night job, so I couldn't call him. This was before the days of cell phones, incidentally, so, and of Uber and all that shit. I mean, you were kind of on your own. So what I did was I decided that I would walk home. But it's a very bad part of town, very sketchy, a lot of miles to go. So I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. The sun's going to come up in about 3 hours. I should be able to make it home by then. There's not going to be any sun. There's not going to be a lot of people. It's going to be scary. So this is how I'm going to do it. I am going to run from shadow to shadow, looking very carefully to make sure that there's nobody around to see me. And then I'm going to run like hell to the next shadow. And then I'm going to wait, make sure it's safe, run like hell to the next shadow. Okay. I was still drunk, obviously. So I did that for about a half a mile. And things were looking good except for my feet. I was wearing these big old wooden Bear Traps sandals. Bear Traps was a brand back then. I think they still sell shoes now. And back in the 70s, their deal was wooden soles, and you know, it was a wooden sole that was a high heel on a platform, and then these bands of leather that crisscrossed it, right? And try to run in those. I mean, it was real tough. So I finally decided I'd take them off. So I took them off, and I'm going barefoot, right? down this street, trying to figure out how I'm going to hide my way home. Well, I get another half mile or so, and then there is a parking lot, a huge parking lot, like, you know, the size of a supermarket parking lot, and it was dirty, littered with glass. There was no place to hide. It was completely in the open. There was, across the street, there were buildings that were right up against the street. I mean, there was just no place to hide. So I knew I had to cross this parking lot. Well, I, for some weird reason, threw away my shoes. I have no idea. I passed a garbage can and I just dropped them in. I mean, I could have kept them as weapons. They were wood, for God's sake. But you know, I was really stupid when I was young. So here I am. I'm getting ready to boog across this parking lot, barefooted. So I start picking my way. Ooh, ow, ew, trying to avoid the glass, stepping on rocks. You gotta imagine this in your head. I mean, think about it. Here's this young girl doing this St. Vitus dance across the parking lot, barefoot in the middle of the night. Okay, so I get halfway across the parking lot, and a car pulls in. A freaking car pulls in very slowly and starts to drive directly towards me. All right. I made my peace with Jesus. And I knew I wasn't going to make it. I knew my time had come. I had 18 years allotted in this life, and here comes my demise, and, you know, at least I ended it with a party, right? So the car comes up to me, and by this time it's hard to explain when you realize that something bad is going to happen and there is nothing you can do about it. I was in that spot. Any of you who have been there know what I'm talking about. So the car pulls up. It was this beat up old gremlin, and the windows were up. I couldn't see in. The window rolls down. You rolled your windows down usually back then, so the window rolls down, and there's this crusty, dirty looking dude, beard. Car was filthy. And he leans out and he says, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know how to get to Knott's Berry Farm?" Yeah, I do know how to get to Knott's Berry Farm. And I said, "I'll tell you what, I live about 8 miles right down this road. You're going to need to go all the way down this road about 12 miles and turn here and go there and hop the freeway and blah, blah, blah." I said, "So let's do this. Go ahead and take me to my corner, to my place, my house, and while we're going, I'm going to draw you a map and give you directions about how to get to Knott's Berry Farm. Okay, sure. Thank you, ma'am. Hop in. Well, it wasn't a stupid decision at this point. I couldn't have really done much of anything if he had been a serial killer. So I hop in push the beer cans and the dirty magazines and the McDonald's wrappers off the seat. I wedge myself in there and, and incidentally, I only weighed like 130 pounds back then, so I could wedge in places pretty well. So anyhow, I get in the car and he pulls up, I don't know, an old receipt from an oil change or something and a pencil, and I'm, writing all this stuff, and we're talking. And he pulls back out, and that guy took me right home. Took me right to my corner. I drew out his map, wrote his directions. We talked about the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Pleasant conversation. He never asked if I was a hooker. He never made a pass at me. He never suggested that I go to Knott's Berry Farm with him. None of that. Just drove me right home. I gave him his note. I thanked him. He thanked me. He drove off. All right. That was an angel. Now, I think I've talked about this before a little bit in one of my previous videos. I mentioned this because we were talking about miracles, and I cited this example as a miracle. When I was sent an angel to save me, and that's what happened. So I carried my little thing around that was my jail release thing for the longest time. I wish I still had it. I don't have it anymore. And I don't know, I don't know if I was actually arrested. I need to actually do a background check on myself and see. But that was my experience. My experience in jail. Yeah, my 2 hours in jail, and the miracle of the angel who was sent to take me home. So there you go, Miss Susan. That is my story, and I am sticking to it. Bye.